In the heat of battle, a single moment may fill an eternity. And in the blink of an eye, an eternity passes, and the battle is won or lost.
Hello and hey, today we're messing around with Path of Exile, this time a Shrapnel Ballista guide for 3.13 Ritual League. It's been over a year since my Metamorph guide, and more than enough changes have been made to sort of justify this update. The skill itself has been buffed heavily since then, and is in as good of a state as we've ever had it. So no matter which ascendancy you choose, the skill tree looks very, very similar. The standouts, however, are Berserker and Champion. Berserker, through its rage and critical strike mechanisms, without even mentioning that 40% more damage node, allowed that ascendancy to reach unparalleled damage numbers, while Champion gives the most damage of the defensive-minded ascendancies, thus giving it the clear nod for me in this boss-focused Echoes of the Atlas expansion. Like I alluded to, just about every ascendancy on the bottom side of the tree has a reasonable Shrapnel Ballista build, and to be fair, even something like Elementalist wouldn't be super disgraced when dipping her toes in, though I'd hardly recommend that. And so, for the focus of this video, I've landed on Champion once again, despite its considerable offensive nerfs in the latest patch, because of the gem's extra ballista, or 2 with investment, and improved defensive layers for the content we are expected to face. Regardless, I'd like to show very brief comparisons in path of building, because although I have landed on Champion for my personal pick, there are definitely elements of preference while obtaining similar results from others. Keep in mind, these are very achievable, realistic, budget-minded numbers. I have left all gems base at level 20, 0% quality, no awakened, and no alternate gems, not dependent on flasks other than diamond, nor any crazy rare gear slotted in, just highly recommended uniques and life resist rares. First up, Champion. Assume this to be our baseline that we kind of compare all the others against. We're almost forced to take the Fortify cluster and Duelist, stretching our points the most thin, leaving it with slightly lower life pool in exchange for much better against hits. Next we have Berserker, which really jumps off the page at you with those damage numbers that are nearly strictly provided by the conditional Rage or insane and well-named Berserk skill. The life pool is definitely higher, but you are taking 110% of damage, which is actually slightly more than double what a champion will take from a hit in its best case scenario, even without accounting for the difference in armor. But yes, huge, huge damage. The second highest damage ascendancy may surprise people, but should be Slayer. The generous amount of more multipliers, as well as the absolutely insane 20% coal, drive the damaging force of this ascendancy to far exceed the others, at least the ones that don't get the triple rage bonuses. Switching gears to a couple of defensive options, Chieftain and Juggernaut. Chieftain has tons of positive qualities for this build, but the damage leaves something to be desired. We have easy endurance charges, insane regen, and totem leech that will all have us topped off, but I think it kind of falls too short on damage to justify a physical impale crit version, because you really want stun immunity. Juggernaut is a lot of the same, giving more damage than Chieftain while trading in regen for defensive stats and not being able to be slowed beyond bases, but it just doesn't get enough of that tankiness or life to kind of justify its also considerably lower damage than other options. Some of the other interesting picks could be Raider, which contains your choice of incredible dodge, phasing, ailment immunity, buffed onslaught, or large frenzy charge buffing. I didn't know how to really call that, but you really want all the arms of the tree, so you are trading damage away for a bevy of options. Once again, the damage falling short with a little bit lower life pool and hard to find stun immunity. That sort of gives way to other options. However, very fast playstyle will feel great for mapping, just not super well suited for the smaller arena encounters that we are expected to face. Gladiator, there's more potential left untapped in this build as I didn't focus too heavily on it, but it does give very nice damage, similar to the other duelist options, It has blind, the potential for block, which through like rear guard and Ruby's concoction could get to a fairly usable rate without sacrificing much damage. And interestingly, the sort of bleed interaction with the explosions can happen if the bleed that the projectiles inflict is the final damage to the enemy. So not super reliable with how many projectiles we have flying around, but is possible. Again, Gladiator sort of underutilized in my testing, and your results may provide better benefits. And we'll finish off with some other ascendancies that people may think of when considering the skill. Hierophant, amazing life pool, is basically the only class to not have to use a mana flask for the build. It just doesn't really work as a crit impale. The strength stacking replica Iron Commander is much better suited for this, which is outside of the scope of this video. But even when you're not placing 2 at a time anymore, you can still get down like 20 totems in about 2 seconds. Like, it's going to be insane. Ascendant, on the other hand, has great life, and the damage can be propped up by Rage as well. It's super versatile. It has the utility options of being able to dip into, you know, some of the improved options of Ranger, for instance. It can, you know, go for the Rage, like I said. It can get heavy regen from Chieftain. It can go into any of the Duelist nodes, but unfortunately that combination just kind of falls short for Fizz, Impale, Crit, Shrapnel Ballista, and becomes a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. And lastly, Elementalist. I kind of just wanted to have 10 options for you guys, but also it deals better damage than Chieftain or Jug versions, so that's a thing. It requires you to kind of grab the Golems, and the all damage can shock, with your choice of Chilling or the Primal Aegis as the defensive layer. And I'm fake mad that this is not a terrible option, but obviously I'm not recommending it. It's just not terrible. So, why Champion? It's very simple. We're going to get hit. With few exceptions, we aren't going to be able to build the damage of Shrapnel Ballista and be able to avoid many hits at the same time. So the always up Fortify combined with the much buffed Totem Taunting gives us the ability to take less than half damage of a Berserker, like I also said earlier. And that's before, again, that the things that we've discussed, like armor, which will be higher on Champion. Thus, despite losing the extra Impale and 50% increased damage, Champion is no slouch on offense. The 6 to 12 attack damage per Impale is still huge, even if we miss out on the 9 extra from the top end being stripped away, and the reduced damage taken that we will have from our totems taunting everything, it's going to be substantial, especially in these large fights with big attacks going everywhere. If we're going to hope to survive, I think we're going to need the defensive layers that Champion provides. So finally, getting to the meat and potatoes of this guide, we are very stretched for points when approaching the skill from the Champion Ascendancy. There aren't very many more nodes that we would want, and in the same way, there aren't very many more nodes that we could get, especially when looking at skill trees around level 95, which is about as high as I'll ever go in a guide. It's a pretty locked-in tree for Champion, as far as just going for damage. The Ascendancy order recommendation, I'll just say early, is Master of Metal, Unstoppable Hero, Fortitude, and Conqueror. The added damage from Master of Metal is going to be amazing early on, while you can wait on Unstoppable Hero and the Fortify cluster, again, in the Duelist part of the tree, until you have Fortitude, so it is completely useless in that point. It would be great if we could run 2 labs at once, however, this is what we're stuck with. The Cluster Jewel you see is not required, but basically permanent Onslaught for 5 points is obviously great. Sleepless Sentries is an amazing choice because of this. All you need is a medium Cluster Jewel that increases totem damage for that, and then shooting for an even better jewel, you can use one with 4 or 5 passives to make use of Ancestral Reach, Ancestral Echo, or Snaring Spirits as the other notable, as well as easy access to a additional jewel slot. But with all that preamble out there isn't much to add for the tree. We grab damage, we grab accuracy, we grab life, and more damage. We prioritize the +1 Ballista nodes while leveling if you choose to level with this, and the link will be down in the description for the POB. Moving over to skills, we'll take a look at the main links. Shrapnel Ballista, Impale, Brutality, Pierce, which is basically required, or Chain or Fork, I guess, but Pierce kind of works the best as it does have a more multiplier on the gem itself. And then for our 5th and 6th links, Vicious Projectiles is obvious, and then Maim is because we kind of lack better options, and it kind of helps us save on socket space, which is very, very tight with this build. Anyway, with Shrapnel Ballista and Pierce both benefiting nicely from alternate qualities to hit dense packs like the extra Pierce or Chains. Like, Chain is more acceptable on an alternate gem than it is the actual, links. So we'll go ahead and just try to add as many pierce or chain as we can. It's better than the plus 10 attack damage for the very dense packs of Delirium or Incursion or Blight, for instance. We just want more pierce than we're going to be able to get with a single pierce gem. Anyway, not super important. So next are auras. We have Pride, Flesh and Stone, Dread Banner, and Precision. You can use any alternatives that you see fit. Flesh and Stone's alternates are nice, but are in no way a priority, just because we're not going to be switching back and forth very often. Other utility skills, I like Frenzy attached to a power charge on critical, and I like an Ensnaring Arrow attached to a Mirage Archer. Again, because sockets are precious, power charges are only a luxury, and Mirage Archer is only quality of life. Those are two sockets you can have back if you want, but we want the Frenzy, obviously, for Frenzy charge generation, and Ensnaring Arrow for enemies can take 20% increased projectile damage. So it's very nice to have that up, especially in the multiple way boss fight. We'd like to shoot one boss and then have our Mirage Archer sort of take care of some of the other bosses so that we don't have to keep firing and we can keep moving and placing totems. Of those I've listed, Frenzy, Ensnaring Arrow, and Power Charge on critical all benefit from the Anomalous. But again, it's next to no priority, and they're just like tiny quality of life things. So again, don't need to blow your budget if you are trying to min-max other parts of your build. And for the movement skill, we'll go ahead and drop Dash with Second Wind. Pretty straightforward. Dash is the best option here because, well, you could make a case that Flame Dash, when using it only for the instant, would get you out of more trouble. However, I think Dash Second Wind just gives you more distance overall, especially if you use an alternate quality. But we want Dash. Divergent Dash giving phasing is very nice, but that one's also very sought after, so weigh your currency accordingly. And then any variant of Second Wind is fantastic. You know, Anomalous, for the additional use with slightly increased cooldown is probably the best choice, but any of them work, including the base. So talking about items, there are a couple of near mandatories for this build. I say that because to get yourself rolling with decent damage, we're going to need to use the Chin Soul. The physical DPS rare equivalent that you'd need to compete with this would be way too expensive. And even with Harvest Crafting coming back in the game, I'm not really sure where to put those bows in terms of price, but still. For the cost, a Chin Soul will far outpunch anything in its competition. And because we are relying on totems being placed at your enemy's feet for the insane multipliers of at close range, which is 20 units, and our point blank keystone, which maximizes at an even closer 10 units, makes Chin Soul an excellent selection. And like I said, near mandatory unless you have an amazing PDPS rare. Another near mandatory is Rain of Splinters. It's much less impactful in terms of like utility or changing anything. We're just getting more damage out of it. The reduced damage is quite steep, so you want to aim for a 35 to 40% reduced range. As approaching 30%, the cost gets very large very quickly. However, we are rewarded with 2 additional projectiles, like I said, so from the base gems 3, that is 66% more if all hit, which is far from a given, but it just minorly helps your clear regardless, and you really want this jewel as it just can provide such a higher maximum damage. This moves us to highly recommended items, I'll say. Comb's Heart, we need life. We've stretched ourselves so far into other damage trees that we do not have very good percentage increased maximum life. The plus 500 helps us do this. So not using this plate opens up 6 more sockets, but even something like Belly of the Beast is around 700 less life. We need life. This is the best option of getting a chunk of flat life. It's highly recommended. You can get by on lower things, just know that you will die more often. That makes a lot of sense. And it's not easy for Champion to get into life nodes and still do the amounts of damage that we want it to do over other defensive Ascendancy. So that's why I've reached this conclusion. And for a quiver, we have Skirmish, which gives us an extra ballista, with the only downside it kind of giving us is the opportunity cost of not getting more defensive stats on our quiver. It still comes highly recommended as a minimum more multiplier of 14% to your build when going from 7 to 8 ballista at gem level 22 and all reasonably reached nodes. And it works obviously better the less ballista you have as a base. So if you're not fully invested with like a hunter amulet that has +1 dexterity gems or something, it's a bigger increase. Anyway, it's highly recommended, but feel free at any time to drop down to a rare with a bunch of life, resists, It's always going to be more important to be alive. You do 100% less damage when you're dead. And getting down to just my regular recommendations, these are just kind of very, I'll say, generic options that fit really, really well for us. Starkonjas, not entirely sure how to say that, is just a great, often used helmet for attack builds. It gives wonderful, relevant stats, and is one of the most enchanted bases in Labyrinth. So it's far from required, just another one of those options that gives you everything that you can use in a very cheap package. And then for the enchant on that, we want the Shrapnel Ballista fires an additional projectile. That's amazing, but it does have a significant cost these days, especially with people being more aware of Shrapnel Ballista thanks to the Replica Iron Commander, which again is outside the scope of this video. But since that build exists, we have a more expensive enchant. So don't sleep on projectile speed or the additional 6 pierce that can be enchanted as well, because those super dense packs, like I was saying, they're the ones that'll get you killed. They give your ballistas trouble, and thinning them out in just one shot is pretty much required for higher end Blight or Delirium. Next thing I like to recommend, and it's almost near mandatory with some bosses, and then it's very almost useless in other cases. And I'm talking, of course, about Empire's Grasp. If an enemy is immune to knockback and hexproof, this item gives us like 1500 armor, and that's it. Just 4 sockets, 1500 armor, and that's it. So definitely why the recommendation is just kind of whatever sometimes, though when they are not immune to those things. Reverse knockback brings the enemy closer and into more projectiles from the same ballista, multiplying your damage. So even if you have like a mirror tier bow and not using Chin Soul, knockback is still likely to happen from the King of the Hill node, from the giant crit thing on the right side of the tree. And pulling the enemies is great, but the large-scale battles like 10 boss encounters, or even just thinking about like Ritual League encounters, we may want to push enemies away from us. And a lot of bosses are knockback immune anyway, so the raw stats may be insanely more helpful for this. It just kind of depends on where it lies. But as far as getting a curse on hit onto a unique, this is going to be a very cheap option to try to get like a vulnerability. Talking like 1x-ish at like most for a big increase to damage. So that's kind of why I wanted to use a unique in the glove slot, so that we can get a base to either vol ourselves or find a reasonably priced curse that we can use, vulnerability. And the last regular recommendation I will use is Dying Sun. 2 additional projectiles, just like Rain of Splinters. If we were to hit with Rain of Splinters and this, it's 40% more damage, or it takes over the 66% more if you, for some reason, went without that jewel, which I don't know why you do. But, of course, this comes with a greater opportunity cost of not using a defensive flask, and you only have so many slots. So use that if you have the currency and can get away on the defensive side. For everything else, we have rares. Just we need life and resists. Of course, min-maxing would love to have you getting more damage from these items, and maybe with harvest crafting, actually it'll be much easier to obtain. Just not sure about the rates of the best crafts, so that's my only cause for pause. But we need to squeeze life out of every piece, and you need to be resist capped, very obviously. Everything else is a lovely bonus. And definitely look into Chaos Res. Damage over time is what's going to kill you most of the time, and definitely don't walk around with 60%, minus 60% Chaos Res. Also of note, the Amulet Anoint for more damage is going to be Shaman's Dominion to get crit chance and crit multi from totems. One more thing I almost forgot to talk about is Lethal Pride Timeless Jewel with Akoya as the god name listed. That will change nearby keystones into Chainbreaker, which will generate 3 rage per second, modified by mana regeneration rate, allowing classes without innate rage to sort of gain the benefits from that, as well as be able to Berserk. This is most effective on Berserker due to the tripled effects, but that makes it even more difficult to survive, as the regen required becomes a non-zero amount. And so for the rest, it's generally just a really nice boost for not much investment. It's a harder to obtain item, so balance your currency accordingly. But definitely wanted to mention that because it is worth noting for sure. And working our way to the flasks, we need an enduring mana flask. There's almost no getting around it. I mean, we constantly place turrets, and that makes us very, very mana hungry. So without dedicating like 3 non-channeling mana reduction crafts, we need an enduring flask. That's the one that does not end if it hits full, right? So unlike life flasks, unlike life flask, we want to use the eternal one, as it's the one that has the longest uptime So don't bother qualitying that, but we need the Enduring Mana Flask. Obviously, you want to use a Quicksilver. That goes without saying. Well, basically, all builds want to use that. A Diamond Flask, as we are going crit, we want to crit more often, very obviously. The maximum charges / reduced charges used. A lot of our damage is kind of tied up into critting, so we really want the most uptime on that, and it's a big priority for us. Defensively, we can use 1 Life Flask at least. You need to be able to stop bleeding, obviously, and you're probably going to end up bleeding on something. That's not a very hard thing to roll. And then the other and last flask that you'll be using is really choice of the taster. You can use a Basalt, a Granite, the Dying Sun, a second Life Flask, a Jade, Stibnite, Elemental to take less damage from whatever enemy you happen to be fighting. Even a Sulfur isn't ridiculous to use. It's just choice of the taster. You're going to know what you like to use for your flasks, so just plug that one in here. It's basically a free slot. And that pretty much wraps up the guide and reasoning for the decisions made in the path of building. But again, it's down in the description. Really appreciate you guys sticking all the way through this. I've tried to cover as much as I could think of in edge cases, but always, iterate to your needs. If you know something that's better or you feel like something's way better and I just missed it, please tell me. I don't want to have a terrible league start. Other people don't want to have terrible league starts. Let's go ahead and get this as nice as it can possibly be. And I've said enough. I'm rambling right now. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Have a good league start. Be safe, guys.